let's start with the big one. Arsenal, 5 big booms. Manchester City, 1. Just an enormous game in context. Arsenal had to win to keep up at least a pretense of a title chase. City, desperate to prove their own free fall, was just in memory repressed. So that is the stakes going into this one. But even bigger, because it was a sequel to Stay Humble A2, Electric Boogaloo, that spike-filled 2-2 earlier in the season, the late John Stones 96-minute goal, which defined this match as the Premier League's most spiky, acrimonious, bitter clash. Really a wheels within wheels heavyweight meet. Overwhelmed by subplots, that ball no doubt still like a phantom limb stinging at the back of Gabriel's head. Oh, I love a feud. I do. And 105 seconds in, football broke out. Dreamland, really. City still in their slop era. It was Ortega, gave the ball to Stones, who kind of elected to bundle it vaguely towards Akanji. Trossard stole it. Fed Rice, slipped in Kai Havertz. Got to say, Kai wanted no part of shooting this early, this cold, in this game, this big a chance. And so he kind of chucked the ball over to Odegaard. Thank God, the one cool head in Arsenal starting 11 who netted gleefully. It was his first goal or assist ever against Manchester City, and it was just a stunning move that screamed City of the Pep Horribilis, that one win in 13 free-fall period were on the field, rather than the stabilising return to belief of 6 wins in 8. I was screaming at my television, don't score too early. And I was also screaming at the television, City should have started Kuzanov raw.
Yeah, it kind of made you realise that there was a little bit of illusion about that Man City recovery. That they did have a run of, vaguely acceptably winnable games. Leicester, West Ham, Salford City, Club Brugge. They were beating teams that City really should beat. And occasionally they were making kind of heavy weather of it, to be honest. Within those first few minutes, because the second minute mistake was followed up by mistakes kind of in the first 15, really, they kind of made it clear that when you put this Manchester City team up against an elite opponent, a lot of those old flaws, they're still there. That they haven't, the root problems have not yet been addressed.
And the goal, we've got to acknowledge, was accompanied by a delicious moment. Gabriel marking Haaland in that second, ran past him. I don't know what you call it. I think it was a drive-by redemption chuckle? And I watched it and I was like, oh my God, Gabriel clearly has never heard of, well, 2 things really. Scoring too early and he who laughs lost.
Yeah, Arsenal do have a bit of a tendency for this, to kind of get their rebuttal in just a little bit too quickly. Obviously, we know how this ends, so it looks like it's not a problem, and it looks like a kind of triumphant moment for Gabriel. It speaks of confidence. But it doesn't require the world to be too different for Gabriel maybe to regret antagonising Erling Haaland. I personally, Rog, would never antagonise Erling Haaland. I feel that would not end well for me. Gabriel's obviously got more self-confidence than I do.
Actually, yeah, ultimately it is a sterling totem of Gabriel's complete and utter sheer self-confidence. I can remember Arsenal games in which they've laughed at Manchester United players in-game and ended up losing 4-2. So this was you knew in that moment it was one or the other. And it looked like Gabriel knew something because City couldn't settle. City looked rattled. They looked unsettled. Bringing in more wide players in this transfer window and defenders when they really cry out for midfield reinforcement. Felt like in the early exchanges, like watching, and I know you all felt this at home, you were probably saying the same to your friends who you were watching with. It felt like just like watching an ageing lion being challenged as alpha by a younger, stronger male hell-bent on taking over the pride. But then City clicked in. Bernardo Silva set the tempo. Started working down the wings. Arsenal hunkered in, tried to deny Haaland space in behind. David Raya had nothing to do really though until 23rd minute. A mammoth Marmouche in swinging corner thundered onto Gvardiol's head, pounded a downward header, and Raya, raw, with the wrists of a Catalan onanist is the only way I can describe it, somehow plumed it away off the post. It was really a warning shot fired.
There's been a lot of criticism for Arsenal in the last couple of years, actually, that they do have a tendency to not go for the kill. Essentially, they like to play with their food a little bit, and I think that's not ideal against teams of really high quality, because if they're weak, you need to punish them, you need to finish them off, and Arsenal aren't great at doing that. And it did look in that moment as though this Manchester City team that are playing completely bereft of confidence, who, we saw against PSG, they tend to concede goals in these huge bucket loads in the space of 10-15 minutes. Arsenal were stepping off, allowing City to kind of establish a bit of a rhythm. Remember that they quite like passing the ball around, that they're quite good footballers. And it was a little sign, look, that these are wounded, but they can still hurt you.
There was another sign of agony, the choose your own adventure, the road not taken, the Arsenal agony that could have been baked into this one, because they did seize their moments to press Arsenal. They did try and challenge Ortega again flailing, Fed Kovacic, who was flattened by the quite excellent Rice, hit him honestly like a cornerback. Ball fell to Kai Havertz, who had all the time in the world, far too much time if we're being honest, in that world. The goal beckoning before him, the win crying Mary. It was hard to watch, Raw. Havertz just lashed the ball wide right of the post. He looked in that moment, but there was a baseball player, Chuck Knobloch, Google him kids. He looked like a baseball player with what they call over here the yips.
I refuse to accept that as anybody's name.
Chuck Knobloch?
No.
We don't have English people called Chuck Knobloch.
Havertz is such... It's really hard, it's really hard to assess that incident, given that I know what happens later in the game. Havertz does look a little bit like one of those strikers, and there are plenty of them. There's one with a ponytail who plays for Liverpool, who don't really like having lots of time to think about things. I think Havertz is clearly an incredibly gifted footballer. He's a super kind of ultra-modern forward, midfielder, hybrid player. But in front of goal, with plenty of time, he's not your guy, is he? That's the thing with Kai Havertz. His goal return is astonishing anyway. He's got a really, really good goal return. He is Arsenal's leading scorer, I think. He is maybe not Saka and Odegaard levels of reliable, but he is kind of their main attacking threat, certainly more so than, say, Martinelli or Trossard. And yet, present him with basically an open goal. He's one of those players you'd think there is a decent chance you're going to miss this, and there's a decent chance that'll come back to haunt you.
Yeah, it has had quite a more than above average, borderline potent return for them goal-wise, but he is a player who is remembered for his misses, and in that moment he looked like a gent who just wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole rather than to have to even shoot the ball. And how I ate for him. I do want to say that the pressure, the context of the title race, the hate his pregnant partners received over social media after those misses. And he is, to me, you talk about him as being someone who doesn't want to think. I think about him as like he's a very, very sensitive human being, really empathetic gent, which is hard to be an empathetic footballer. I think that's what makes him such a sympathetic figure to me. But the game moved on helter-skelter. Another good Raya save from a Savinho first-timer kept Arsenal's lead. And their contact with Liverpool. John Champion, with great flourish, kept talking about Liverpool as Arsenal's quarry, which I just loved. City opened that second half with lots of the ball. Arsenal almost content to let them have it. It's what you were talking about. Arsenal tried to slow down the game. Dared City to break them down. Bold gambit cotton, as they say. And it bit them in the behind. 55th minute. Savinho cross. Haaland was in front of Saliba. He leapt up. Snapped his neck. Incredible thing about this goal. Saliba gave him a two-handed shove into the small of his back while he was airborne. And it did not seem to move him a centimetre. It was like watching a very strong man try and push an enormous block of granite. And God, Haaland. By the way, in the moment, look at his celly. It was actually more terrifying because he restrained himself from any shithousery. In the moment, even when I watched this goal knowing the score, Haaland looked like a man who had murder on his mind, almost unfinished business. And it felt in that second, oh my God, pray for Arsenal.
Yeah, he didn't look like he'd taken the joke very well, did he? He looked a little bit like maybe he was thinking, I don't really like that Gabriel. That Gabriel's he's disrespected me a little bit, been a little bit cheeky.
Yeah, I feel like Joe Pesci and Goodfellas levels of taking a joke. Is that what you're saying?
If I was Erling Haaland, I would make that my celebration. That's his brand. He's the ice-cold, steel-cast Norwegian cyborg. Just stop showing emotions. I remember saying to you, actually, I was disappointed with Haaland with the stay humble thing, because you just assume that Haaland kind of speaks with the same kind of rhetorical flourish as Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator films. Like, that's how he should be. It's completely flat, toneless, almost monotonous, because he doesn't really have human emotions. He's trying to learn them from Sarah Connor. I think it's better if Haaland is just kind of doesn't smile, all the dolls he straws don't make him happy. He becomes kind of a metaphor for human life if he does that, despite being a robot, and that makes him more powerful.
God, I genuinely expected him to laugh in Gabriel's face. That's exactly.
But how much better is it that he didn't?
It was terrifying.
Exactly.
It was when you watch this, even knowing the score, I find it something like I watch it, I'm like, should I let my children watch this? I probably shouldn't let my children watch this. It's that humanly scaring, which makes it all the more amazing, Raw, what followed. Because I did not think it would happen in that second. I'll be honest, I expected an Arsenal buckle in this moment. Just the existential pressure on them. The knowledge of their layers of past failures which have fallen like snow on snow. The fact City have been there forever agony. I'll be honest, I did not see this coming. I did not see the refocus, the discipline, the finding, by the way, not just of an extra gear. It was like 2 or 3 levels of intensity. It was almost like an Arsenal white-hot heat that followed in reaction. Because within a minute, Partey swooped in on a suspect Foden square pass, edge of the box, urged to shoot by the crowd from distance. Who does that anymore? But he pulled his foot back like a Ghanaian Vincent Kompany. Yes, it span off John Stones' ample buttocks, the ball, and just looped into the net. But it was a gobsmacking moment of misdirection by the Premier League writers who unfurled a storyline of true Arsenal tenacity, spine. By the way, Arsenal luck with the deflection too, none of which we've connected to them post-January in the modern period.
I'd actually offer a slightly different interpretation.
Please.
Obviously what we know happens means that it was and it is and it will be correctly presented as kind of Arsenal's not quite resurgence, but it's kind of an Arsenal roar of defiance. It is, you have angered us, we will wipe the floor with you, and in doing so, we'll kind of build this momentum that to me, I think, has a significant, like, tangible impact on the title race. But more than anything, I think what we saw was City collapse. That was the defining thing, that second goal, Stones' part in it is unlucky, although I think he said afterwards he maybe could have tried a bit harder to block it properly. But the pass from Foden is exactly. The pass from Foden is so loose. It's so, lazy almost. It's thoughtless is probably a better word. They gave Arsenal, they just got back in the game, and you are right, that was primed for, okay, Arsenal are going to really feel the pressure now. This is potentially going all wrong in exactly the same way as it always goes wrong for Arsenal against Manchester City. And don't forget, if City had won that game, suddenly they're quite close to Arsenal. They're not far off at all. They'd be, I think, 9 points behind them, 6 points behind them. That's not too bad. But because Foden gives the ball away, because Stones doesn't kind of make the block properly, he kind of does that weird thing where he turns away from the ball to try and block it if it goes in one specific place, but not in literally any other. Arsenal get this huge jolt of adrenaline, and City just couldn't live with it. They looked completely overwhelmed in the same way as they did against PSG a couple of weeks ago in the Champions League. They seemed to crumple and fade and disintegrate before our eyes, really, which is something. It's still hard to see City do that because you're not expecting, you are conditioned to believe that City don't do that. We've never seen Manchester City do that. But now they seem to do it pretty much constantly as soon as they're challenged.
The way you describe it, the rest of the game in a way was like watching a light blue lung collapse before our eyes. 6 minutes later, Declan Rice again. What an instigating force he was in this one. Fed a speeding Myles Lewis-Skelly, an 18-year-old kid. What a week he's had. Sent off last week, wrongly. Red card, rightly rescinded. Given a new lease of freedom and life, which he took advantage of, charging past Stones, lashing a shot that went through Ortega's hand. Goalkeeper could have done better, but thank God he didn't, because MLS charged off that teen Arsenal youth development product after his first ever goal in the Premier League, and just unleashed levels of mischief at teenage kicks proportions, ran to the sideline, sat down in the Haaland trademark Zen celebration. I always wondered, did you plan this? Did you not plan it? Did it just come in the moment? a teen Raw, being a footballing hero for the club that he came through with on the field and winning the memes off it. I don't know which is more important nowadays, but my God, are you surprised at it? Just how much Arsenal here, because you can look at it two ways. These are a team of professional footballers in the midst of a title race. How much they took the Haaland insult Raw and just felt it so personally, because this was Zen chutzpah.
A little bit, and I don't want to, obviously with my affiliations, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to create controversy or drama or whatever it might be when it's not really necessary. I do think Arsenal have a bit of a tendency to kind of over-celebrate prematurely. Do you remember the Odegaard camera thing last year?
Oh, that was lovely. It was lovely.
It was a really nice thing at the time, and the motivations behind it were, unquestionable. But I think most players are quite conscious of how will this look if this story doesn't end the way we want it to. So maybe the fact they're prepared to do it is a sign of their confidence, it's a sign of their self-belief. Maybe it's something we should really kind of encourage in them and in all footballers. Arsenal's kind of pursuit of the Premier League title this year, as it was last year and the year before, seems really kind of emotional to me. And I do believe that teams who resist emotion are the ones that are most likely to win. I think that's one of the things that City have always been really good at, is they don't really let the emotions of it get to them. They just kind of keep churning out the results. They always seem relatively unfazed. Then they don't really get fussed if they fall behind or if they occasionally drop points. Nothing seems to get to them. Whereas with Arsenal, it does feel as though there's a lot. It feels like a wave about to break, and it might be that it breaks and it's all glorious and wonderful, and you ride it and it's exhilarating. But it also might mean you just get really wet, and I think that's the risk with Arsenal. That's not a great metaphor. I apologise.
Oh, but did he win any trophies? No, but he got really
wet.
By the way, I just want to the levels of poetry here, though. Haaland had looked at Lewis-Skelly in the last game, as you said earlier, and said, "Who are you?" The fact that it was him scoring, I mean, he knows now. GFOP at SC Boston called it Haaland Freude, what we were watching before our eyes. By the way, I'm sure Haaland, who is actually, as is well known, a serious student of Zen teaching, just looked at it in the moment and just thought of his favourite tenet. I think it was Lao Tzu that said, when you realise nothing is lacking, the whole world belongs to you.
I'm not sure that Erling Haaland would have been thinking about that in the moment, to be honest. He'd probably be thinking, why do these people keep passing the ball to those fellas in the red shirts? That would have been his primary...
He felt he was just thinking about making more beaver dams with his dad in the off-season. But Arsenal's work was not done. Manic City, frenzied City at this point, press forward, so open. Arsenal just kept killing them in transition. Fourth goal, honestly, like footballing Prozac this moment. It really was. Martinelli down the left, fed Havertz from an angle. This gent who's dished when he could have shot, missed with an open goal beckoning. Probably the hardest chance of the lot. And he cut inside Stones, lashed low and true. His knee slide rule towards the Arsenal faithful. He's such a quiet man. Rarely actually unleashes that kind of emotion, even when he scores. What we saw there, the joy, the relief, the belief, I'd like to hope, the everything that's good in life. I mean, by the way, Arsenal fans, all of it, the sacked in the morning from the 84th minute onwards, what a beautiful soundtrack for them. But we've got to focus on City. Sloppy, as you've said, creators of their own downfall. Honestly, second half, as exposed as Kanye's wife at the Grammys, Pep seething. His eyes must have been borderline bleeding watching his players just cough up possession. The levels of humiliation down the stretch must have felt infinite there. Emirates seething mockery, just rocking. It's the first time a Guardiola side has conceded 5 goals, lost by a margin as much as 4 goals, Miguel Delaney tweeted. But it was the ease with which Arsenal scored, the Manchester City fecklessness ultimately. Pep called it fragility. What should this team have done to them what they have done to so many in this league, including Arsenal in seasons past? That's what will hurt the most, right?
Yeah, it was really kind of chilling watching it, to be honest, because I think quite a lot of us have felt that maybe City had turned a corner a little bit, that they'd restored a little bit of confidence in winning some of those winnable games that we talked about earlier. They looked like maybe they were, good for maybe not a title charge, but maybe to restore a little bit of dignity over the course of the next 3-4 months. You maybe finish a solid third or whatever, overhauling the giants of Nottingham Forest. But in the end, I tell you, the game it reminded me of, and this may be a slightly kind of niche comparison. Do you remember when Manchester City won 6-1 at Old Trafford in the derby?
Of course. Why always me?
The Balotelli game. Why always me? That game was, I think, 3 or 4-1 with about 5-6 minutes to go. And Alex Ferguson said afterwards that he knew the game was lost at that point. There was no way back. You might, nick one from a corner. You never know in football. Obviously, that's the glory of the sport. But generally, all things being equal, that game was finished. And United, because they were so used to being the assertive team, the team that attacked and attacked and attacked, the team that could bend any game to their will, they kept pouring forward. And Ferguson, I can't remember whether it was in an autobiography or an interview, said that he regretted not just telling them to sit back, that the smart play at that point was to say, look, we've lost this game, let's just not be humiliated. But they kept pouring forward and City kept catching them out on the break. And I think 2 or maybe even 3 of the goals came relatively late on. So what would have been an annoying derby defeat became this kind of legendary humiliation that Man City fans still sing about now, certainly whenever they face Manchester United. It felt a little bit like that. It was a fragile performance. It was a kind of exposure of all of City's weaknesses. But more than anything else, it felt like City just lacked game sense. Just accept that at 3-1, 4-1 down, you just need to stop the game happening. You need to make sure that you don't give them any chances. And yet, I think for the 4th goal, that Arsenal had a 3 or a 4-on-2 at one point, and they'd had one a few minutes beforehand. It was as though City just couldn't quite think for themselves. They are better than us today. We are going to lose this game. Let's lose it 3-1. Let's not lose it 5-1.
I mean, as you're saying, the Manchester United loss, it was less a loss. It's more the complete and utter stripping of their identity. Yeah. Time will tell whether we look at this game in retrospect as something similar. But City now have a double-header against Real Madrid in the Champions League, then Newcastle, Liverpool, Tottenham, Nottingham Forest and Brighton in successive Premier League games. Godspeed. But this night was all about Arsenal and their huge, delirious win. Arteta's been so bloody good against Big Six teams in the Premier League. He's unbeaten in 17 games against them now. But this one felt like more, to borrow a Liverpool phrase. Nwaneri wrapped it up late, a lash of wonder, culminating, I think, 36 uninterrupted passes involving every single Arsenal outfield player. Pep once told me that was his perfect kind of City goal that he dreamt of, where every player touches a ball before it's put in the back of the net. Nwaneri's finish capping the best under-21 night at the club of all time. Last kick of the ball. He then hugged Lewis-Skelly at the final whistle. A hug that must fill Arsenal fans' hearts with true joy. An 18-year-old goal scorer hugging a 17-year-old goal scorer after the Gunners' biggest win over City since 2003. Saka coming onto the field to hug every Arsenal player was almost the capper as Kendrick Lamar's Humble was played at the full-time whistle roar. Yes, Ro, I know you're in your own head, you're saying, who dat? Thinking that he fronted the man. After a season spent chasing the injuries, fuming at referees, the possibility of conspiracies, let's just say, the whole thing, watching it, that end, it was almost like watching a collective karmic catharsis.
Yeah, I feel like Arsenal needed it in lots of ways. First and foremost, to kind of prove to themselves that they have seen off City for this season. City are not a match for Arsenal as things stand. That might prove to be relevant in the Champions League. I think we can safely say now that Arsenal will finish above Manchester City probably quite comfortably. The teams look worlds apart. But also the thing that struck me was you need statement results in title races. Arsenal have been kind of not tripping up, but they've been stumbling just a little bit recently. Relatively lucky to get away from Wolves with a win, a couple of drop points, a couple of missed opportunities within the last couple of months. It had started to feel as though it was maybe souring a little bit for Arsenal. That result against those opponents has a kind of coagulant effect, I think. It makes everything just come together. And Arsenal, I've been thinking throughout this title race that I can't see Arsenal going on the sort of run that City used to, where you'd win 10, 12, 15 games in a row. I sort of can now. I think that is now, I'm not saying they will, but I think it's possible because I think a result of that scale, a statement that bold and that loud can have ramifications not just for your morale as a team and your sense of purpose and sense of self, but for everyone who plays you. They've seen what you can do, and that changes the way that teams approach playing you.
I just want to say, ultimately, I was so bloody happy for Arsenal fans as they all sang Erling Haaland, stay humble, you, unrepeatable word. I mean, only time will tell the answer to that. I guess the big question, the impossible question, was whether we watched an Arsenal new reality, a title race statement, or whether that, and I whisper this, whether it's as good as it gets. By the way, as an Everton fan, I would say that's enough for me. I know it's not for Arsenal, but was that just a memory that will be remembered for an entire generation? Where they'll be, do you remember that day when we all beat Pep 5-1? It was humanly magnificent.